Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we are going to be talking about what service organizations stand to gain from better branding. I am super excited to welcome today Marta Riggins, who is a strategic consultant around employer brand, employee engagement, and employee comms. Formerly held roles at companies like Instacart and LinkedIn and Pandora Music. And I met Marta at Field Service Next West because she did an excellent session on some of the things we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So, Marta, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and meeting you was such a highlight of my time there as well.
Same. And hopefully, some of you are on YouTube watching this because Marta's earrings are cassette tapes and they're fantastic. So, hopefully, some folks get to see those. Yes, you had a late afternoon slot, which is tough, but you brought the energy and the insight, and it was excellent. So we're going to get into all of that. Before we do, tell everyone just a little bit more about yourself, your background, your work, whatever you would like to share.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me as a guest. My background is like many of us, have had multiple careers. I started my career in marketing. I did everything around traditional marketing, marketing communications, thought leadership marketing, experiential event marketing, and I sort of fell into the HR world. Um, well over 15 years ago and really into the employer branding space, not by any intention other than I was in a marketing role for Pandora Music, leaving all live event production. And the head of HR tapped me on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, we could really just use a lot of help thinking through how we market the company. People don't really know we're a great place to work. They know the product of Pandora Music, but they don't know us as a destination for their career. We need help with events. Could you help us?" And I had never thought about marketing in that capacity.
Hmm.
And I was super intrigued by it. And I jumped in like head first, like, wow, what a cool experience. And the more that I dove into that world, the more that I realized how much my marketing background and skills could really affect a company a different way, their ability to attract incredible talent. And then as I was in that role, I kept getting, more into the world of HR. I eventually inherited culture and employee engagement, social impact, touch things like employee communication, and belonging and inclusion. And I was like, wow, this is where I want to be. I love this work. It all ties together. It's super meaningful. And I have a lot of transferable skills that I want to apply to this space. So that's how I got here. And I have been doing this work ever since. I've worked in-house at companies like you mentioned. And then about 5 years ago, I went off on my own to consult. And I wanted to work, I'd been working in tech and media, which is awesome, but I wanted to work with other types of companies, industries, nonprofits, museums, like everything, because I think uh, everyone is experiencing the same challenges
Hmm.
and the playbooks are similar. They can be applied in multi-industry. So
Yeah.
that's why I got into it, and I absolutely love it. So that's my background.
Yeah. Really cool. And, I think for this audience specifically, it's such a great time. I mean, it would have been great if we were having this conversation a few years ago too, because I mean, it was the time then, but like we're really at the time, where they're starting to really think about this differently, really push out of their comfort zones to get a bit more creative. And challenges are certainly forcing that hand a bit. But I actually just saw on LinkedIn, this is a bit different from our topic for today, but there's the chief service officer for an organization named Gaia. I actually did a keynote for them in Madrid in February for their service function kickoff for the year. I just saw him post on LinkedIn that they're hiring a role for marketing. And within the service function of like a manufacturing organization, service, hasn't really been viewed as its own unique business. And how do we position these solutions? How do we create a narrative? How do we create a story around it? So I thought that was just so cool. And certainly from a talent perspective, at the conference we met at, session after session after session, mentioned how big of a struggle that is for organizations, the need to bring folks in. So, we're really starting to see people think differently and take a lot more action. So it's a great time to be having this conversation. So, you I'm sure got to interact with some folks at the event, which are representative of the similar folks listening in today. So we know that there's a lot of people leaving the workforce, not as many people coming in. The landscape of talent has changed. What people want from their career has changed. How willing they're will or how long they're willing to stay in a particular role. All of this has evolved. What would you tell those listening about the intersection of employer brand? Like, why is it so important to be thinking about this challenge through that lens? And what does it even mean, I guess?
Yeah, let's go back. I feel like we'll break it down piece by piece. Employer branding essentially is all about perception. If you break down what it is in a basic level, it is understanding, is this a good company to work for? Is it have a great reputation for peers in media? Is it a place that people say they like to work? Is it known for being a top employer of choice? That's a word that we use often in the space, right? So that's really what it is. And then there is a connection to employee engagement and retention. If people are not feeling engaged in their workforce and they're not being retained, it's really hard for them to be your brand ambassadors. You can't,
Hmm.
you kind of need them. Your engaged employees are your best brand ambassadors. So they're very closely tied. I often will get brought in and be like, "Hey, I want you to do an award strategy for me. Help me become a top employer of choice and get these awards." And first I go, "Well, let's look at your engagement data. How's it
Hmm.
looking? We can't be submitting something that's not there." So I think those two things are very much connected. And then, around your question about what does it mean today? Why is it important? It's important because I think people are really reevaluating what they want out of work. We've
Hmm.
seen some major shifts ahead of the pandemic. If you looked at different industries and seniorities, people wanted different things. Since the pandemic, globally, all the value props that attract any talent at any level, at any industry are the same. It kind
Hmm.
of goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if anyone was a comms or psych major in college, where you're really looking at, the things that really draw people are, am I going to get paid? Do I have compensation? Are my basic needs met? Do I have benefits that, help with my health and my well-being? Are there, is there stability? Is there flexibility? Do I have any flexibility, whether that's, how I decide where I work or when I work? And then am I learning something new? And
Hmm.
so that is really important because if you don't have a story around that, it is really hard to attract people to your company and retain them. And you don't have to hit on every one of those things, but every company is strong in at least one or two of those areas. And
Hmm.
that's why it's a really important aspect of employer branding is what is resonating and what is relevant with who you're trying to attract or retain.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, for our audience, it's interesting because the challenge is compounded in a way because we're talking about a set of industries that people don't necessarily even know about by brand or think about, right? And so I wrote this article honestly years ago, and the title was Field Service Has a Branding Problem, right? It's funny that we're having this conversation all these years later. But then I wrote another article maybe a year or two ago, and a friend had recommended a show called Halt and Catch Fire. It was on AMC, and my husband and I were watching it one night, and the in the episode, one of the main characters made the statement, modern society sits on a foundation of services that we take for granted. And that
Mm,
statement made me think like, what we're talking about today is really how an organization develops its own brand. Like, why do you want to be the employer, or why am I the employer in this space, right? But from a field service perspective or from a services perspective, there there's this whole network of industries and roles within those industries that truly keep the world running. And it made me think of like, we need an elevator pitch, to help younger people understand that there is all of this career potential that aren't in the top 10 things that are going to come to mind when you ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I think the challenge is compounded by the reality that we're talking about organizations that are kind of not just vying to be the best in their space, but really to be understood in the context of the role they play in the world, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
Um, so at the event, you shared some examples, some really cool examples of companies you see doing this really well. So can you describe for our listeners like what works, not only works well, but like what stands out?
Absolutely. So I think that the best employer branding really speaks to the personality of your company and even your industry that you're working in.
Hmm.
You know, how to get like to brass tacks, it's about like themes, like thematically, what is so unique to your company and your industry that you can say. So I showed some examples. One was a career site from a company called Lunchbox.io, which again, I know no one there, but I showed this
Hmm.
example like hundreds of times at conferences. They just do such a phenomenal job. They are a service that helps like back end tech stack for the restaurant industry. And if
Hmm.
immediately the way that they talk about themselves, the visuals of the career site are like you're back in the industry. Like if anybody who's ever worked at a restaurant knows there's just this feel that's a little like tattoo punk rock to working in a restaurant, and it's there. They highlight things like tattoo stipends as a benefit. I mean, just the way they talk of themselves, I think that's a great example. It's so unique to them. It's unique to the industry that they are in and to
Hmm.
restaurant. When I was at Instacart, when I joined, there was this awesome, really great culture of just like food and not just, grocery delivery, right? But you didn't feel that. As a
Hmm.
candidate, when I first joined, I was like, wow, like I've been using this service, it's amazing, but I don't feel that outside of even coming in. Like if I look up your company, I don't even know that, right? But people organically there like had potlucks and were like, oh, like what's something that's always in your cart? Like what's a food item that you always have in your cart? And I was like, this is the nuggets. Like this is what we need to take
Hmm.
externally. So we really built a food-centric brand. We even leaned into food puns, which many people initially were like, this isn't serious. How could we be taken seriously? And like, bottom line, when they went public, food puns were all over their branding on Wall Street.
Also, fun
So
works. Like, there's
it's
no
fun.
rule saying you cannot have fun at work or you cannot have fun in how you're creative and what you put out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think like and we end up doing all sorts of thematic food puns and food branded like pieces about our culture, and we talked about like it being like a potluck, like everyone brings something to the table, or in the email
Hmm.
signatures we had always in my cart like strawberries, or we brought all that stuff external. And so I think you just hit the nail on the head, Sarah. It's about fun. It's about fun, it's about playfulness, it's about whatever really speaks to your culture. How can you own that and brand that
Hmm.
unique to you?
Yeah. Now, I know when we were prepping for this, we talked about one crucial rule is it does need to be accurate. So it can't
Yes,
be like, this fairy tale, completely fictional version of what folks would expect if they actually come and work for the organization. Do you want
yes,
to speak about that a bit? Like,
yes.
how do you kind of find what is, compelling and even fun, but grounded in reality?
Absolutely. And I mean, you could tell a story that's not true, but people will just, revolving door leave
Mhm.
immediately. I think that the really like you really have to be you want to be creative and fun, and but you have to be aspirational yet grounded in reality. That's what I talked about in that talk. And I think it's about like what are the things that fundamentally are true in your culture or your work environment that you can speak to? And there might be things that are aspirational where you know you're shifting, where you're going as an
Mm.
org, and maybe they're not fully baked, and you can hint to those, right? You can speak to that, but you can't go all in if it's not there.
Yeah.
A good way to make sure that your, branding is really grounded in reality is you have to have data points. So like the way that I do branding is I'll write statements and I'll write copy, and then I literally have a data point to back up, like at least four data points backing up what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So if I say we really value well-being at this company and time off, then I better back up what the policy is, time off, if there's shutdowns, what that is, or what the benefits are, or examples of how the culture comes together. That is one surefire way to make sure that you keep it authentic to who you are.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Now, we talked about the fact that many of the industries that fall into like this service realm, a lot of them have some really rich legacy, and, you know, a very well-defined, if not sometimes antiquated, brand. But I think it's safe to say that, a fair amount of them put limits, I think, real or perceived, on their ability to be creative. Um, do you have any advice for folks on like how to break free of that? Like how to foster more creativity, how to kind of get out of the what it's always been, you know, chains to kind of free flow some new ideas?
Absolutely. I think I have a couple suggestions. I think one is, when you talk about brand identity, there's multiple types of brand identity, right? There's the company's brand identity, which definitely has a strict, formidable feel to it that's hard to break at times. And then there could be a customer facing one. When you look at the lens of employee facing or candidate facing, there's usually a little more wiggle room because you're talking about the people and the employee experience versus the customer experience or the corporate experience or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think that taking that and really like focusing on that, kind of separating it a bit. It's not that it should be disconnected, but when you're initially starting out, separating it and thinking of it in that realm is very helpful.
Hmm.
Another thing I like to ask and interview stakeholders when I develop this messaging. So people from all different aspects of the company, geographies, levels, tenures. And I like to ask people, why did you first join? And if they've been there a long time, why have you stayed? And
Hmm.
you start to get interesting themes. I like to ask people, what is, what do you think your unique cultural advantage is? Like what's so unique to your company that you don't think exists anywhere else? And it's something I can't see on a career site or I can't read about in a benefit guide. And then you'll get these incredible stories that really
Hmm.
speak to the culture. Like people will tell me a time um, when, they had a personal hardship and how the company supported them through something difficult. They'll tell you about launching a benefit. They'll tell you about a gathering that was really powerful and meaningful. They'll tell you about volunteering together. They'll tell you the real of what makes your culture unique. And that really sparks ideas for me
Hmm.
of like, okay, there's a thread around this cultural thing, this tradition, this routine that you have, whatever it is. And I'll start to kind of go off there. So I think almost taking an untraditional approach and
Yeah.
just starting with the why is a great place to start for
Hmm.
creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, asking those questions, in some different areas, some different ways gives you some really good inspiration and lets you see where there are commonalities, like, oh, if a different version of this has come up a couple of times, like we're on to something, that must
Yep,
be real. Good.
exactly.
So you spoke at the event about the employee value proposition. And so can you talk a bit about how the employee value proposition ties into employer branding and what folks listening might want to keep in mind about what is most in demand today from an employee value proposition perspective?
Sure. And the employee value proposition, for those who maybe have never heard that term before, is really just sort of It's messaging. It's employer brand messaging. It's an articulation of sort of the give get, what employees get in exchange for giving you, the company, all of their talents and skills and uniqueness that they bring as a person every day. And I think that with the EVP and creating that messaging, it's important because it basically gets all employees singing from the same songbook, essentially. It gets everybody like are, just kind of crystallizing that sometimes
Mhm.
reminds people who've been there a long time, like, oh yeah, I forgot we do that. That is pretty cool. That is special. And for new employees coming in, it helps again, like my Instacart example, people really understand why they should come there before they even get in the door. You want
Mhm.
candidates ideally bought into your culture, the brand, what the benefits, what they offer them before they're interviewing, right? So this messaging is super valuable because you then use it to update all your sort of external channels, which are like your career site, your LinkedIn, your Glassdoor, your Indeed, wherever you're marketing to candidates. You can update your job descriptions with it, how recruiters reach out to people, and then internally you can brand programs to it. When you launch, messaging or you have, company town halls or all hands, you're talking about it. So this messaging is really foundational to keep kind of reminding people the why over and over when they're coming in or they're, in the company and they're at the company.
Mhm. Yeah. Are there certain, I guess, wish list items, for lack of a better term, that candidates are looking for today? Like,
Yes, you asked me that. I'm
and then,
sorry.
well, and I'm also, no, it's okay. I'm also just thinking, like, going back to, you know, how that intersects with needing to make sure we're being honest and realistic, right? So, like, that's kind of where my head is at. Like, what is
Absolutely.
important to
Yeah.
people? And then, I think it brings us back to this idea of how can we get creative? Like, yes, there might be limits to that. And, our situation might prevent us from doing what X company is doing. But how do we kind of know what is important and then, force ourselves to think differently than maybe we have before?
Absolutely. So the top value props, as we say, that matter to candidates. This is all candidates across generations, across industries, what have you, geographies in the world, are pay is number one. The number two is work-life balance and flexibility. And flexibility really is the name of the game right now.
Hmm.
And again, as I mentioned, that can be flexibility and agency over where you work or the hours that you work, the times that you work. It's any agency you can give to people. It's
Hmm.
about control. If you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs again. And then job security is a big one because it's
Hmm.
especially in the US, the job markets have been unstable. I think that's something that service industries and frontline industries can absolutely offer that a lot of industries cannot right now. And
Yeah.
that is something to market. Something that's really interesting is that there has been an increase of data that future employees will take, up to a 5% pay cut. 40% of people will take up to a 5% pay cut just to have some sort of flexibility
Hmm.
over their schedule. So those are the things that are really driving the talent market. And I gave an example at the conference about, that flexibility can be in all sorts of ways. One example was about Land O'Lakes, who had zero people applying to some of their manufacturing plants. They had no one applying, and they introduced flex schedules for the plant. And they ended up getting, like over 100 applicants to the role. They ended up filling them fast, and they adopted flex work hours for, I think it was 60% of their plants in manufacturing centers. And then they were expanding it to all of their markets because it was
Hmm.
just not just an amazing recruiting tool to attract talent, but to retain people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good example. And I think, what I try and encourage our listeners to keep in mind is that, when you are in a situation where you're responsible for ensuring service 24/7 or with X% uptime or, whatever the parameters are, yes, it makes it more complex. But it doesn't mean that there aren't options and there aren't ways to do it. So I think just defaulting to, well, we can't do that because X or that wouldn't work here because Y is lazy. I think it's really important to just step away from that. You don't have to change anything, just leave it there, come over here and think about like, okay, how else could we accomplish what we need to accomplish than we do currently? And what could that look like? And I've had examples in the last couple of years of organizations that have made changes that have still allowed them to meet their requirements, but are offering better flexibility to their teams. And it can be done and it makes a huge difference. And knowing it is the number two most important thing to candidates across roles, industries, the globe, you know, should be really
Yeah.
good motivation to go figure out how you make it happen.
I agree.
Um,
I think it'll continue. I think if the economy, if the rate of inflation and cost of things were not so high, it would be number one.
yeah.
And I think it will continue. I think it will continue
Hmm.
to be a top value prop. And like you said, there's so many models. You can do flex work time. You can do 90-day schedules, right? Every other Friday off. There are so many companies across industries who have figured it out. And
Yep.
I think it's the long game. If you figure that out, you are not only going to attract people, but you're going to retain your people more.
Yeah.
And I think around your point in the beginning around branding to younger people as an opportunity, I think that if this can be branded as an opportunity for Frontline, it is a huge win. And
Hmm.
it's an opportunity to really like be, I talked about this at the conference, Frontline first.
Yeah.
Whoever can come in and brand themselves as Frontline first is going to win in this
Hmm.
space.
Yeah. I think it's also like it's deeper than just can we or can't we? Like it from a psychology perspective, it's indicative of leadership mentality, right? Like if it's just no, we can't, no, we won't, we must do it this way. Like it tells people it's probably not an environment where they're going to enjoy being, right? Like it's yeah, being that rigid is kind of at odds with the type of environments people want to be part of. So
Yeah.
it's giving red flags.
Agree. It's giving
So,
red flags. And you know
yeah.
what? My favorite thing to do, and I think the tech industry does this really well, they love a pilot. You call something a
Mhm.
pilot, they are game. So
Yeah.
just even, you do a trial of something and you tell your employees, we're going to do a little pilot. We're going to do this for a quarter, a month, 6 months. Pick a time frame. And we're going to see what the results are. We reserve the right to change our mind, but we're going to see what the impact is.
Yeah.
And then if it's successful, you keep investing in it. If it's not, you pivot and do something else. And so
Hmm.
I think for some reason when people get stuck, it's often that they're not thinking about, hey, you could try something and it's
Right.
you don't have to commit entirely.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not all or nothing. There's so
Yeah.
many different variations or options, like you said. It's and I think it doesn't have to be the ideal to give someone a sense, like you said, it's about control. Like they want to feel like they have some of that control. So where can
Yeah.
you give a little to get a lot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So since our audience is made up of a lot of service leaders who probably have plenty of ideas and opinions, maybe some who are willing to be far more creative than the companies that they work for, they're not responsible themselves for not only employer branding, but even sometimes aspects of the EVP, et cetera. How would you suggest they partner effectively with HR, to share some of these ideas, to communicate some of the challenges or opportunities, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's a cross-functional relationship. I always say employer branding is really a cross-functional sport. And so I think there's a component of HR, there's a component of communications, there's a component of marketing. I think leaders just coming together and sharing the big picture. Hey, you know what? We need pipeline. You don't have enough pipeline. We have to hire X amount of people in these markets. we're not able to, like bring in enough people. We need to figure out a better story. We need to figure out better benefits. Like, we need to figure out something that's really going to draw people. Let's collaborate together. What could we do? And making them part of the solution and have them
Mhm.
be like a team that's brainstorming, that's an amazing first step. Just go to them as a thought partner
Yeah.
and brainstorm together. And then bring in employees, like a little subset of employees who you trust and value, who represent the areas you need to hire from or we need to retain, and have them be like, what do you think? Do you think this would be popular? What do you think? Would people like this? How's this positioning to you?
Hmm.
That is a great first step to take.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the point about coming back to leveraging your existing employees as a source of inspiration, ideas, but also to vet, right, these different concepts. Like, could this work? What do you think of this? Would you prefer this or this? Right. And it can be a really helpful way to make some good progress. So I know you're a big fan of data. Um, what is a piece of research related to what we're discussing today that listeners might be surprised by?
I I'll share this one because I thought this was surprising, and I'm curious if it is to your audience. But there was a Frontline report that was talking about how 87% of frontline workers aren't sure if the culture their company is marketing or talking about on their career site even applies to them,
Mm,
which I think is sad.
hmm.
And then 50%, were saying that they don't feel they're even communicated or thought of. And I don't know, is that surprising to you, Sarah, to hear that?
No. Um, Unfortunately, no. Because, I think to be fair toward the audience, okay? Like if you think about the shift in talent needs and wants, right? Part of it is there, well, I mean, there's a lot of different factors, but the reality is 20 years ago, what was working. And it was bringing in frontline employees and having them just go out and do the same job day after day without a lot of connection, leadership, relationship, or expectation of progression or connection or
Mm.
purpose, etc. It worked, and companies just went with that for a long time. So I think the model hasn't adapted at the same rate that the talent needs have. And so I think it's unfortunate, but I think, it's there's no there's no help in pointing fingers, I guess. It's just what was working is not, right? So we need to do better. And I think where we are now, people don't want to feel like they're just some island that's paid by this company, but they don't understand um, how their role impacts the objectives. They don't feel part of what's going on, and I
Yeah.
think that um, companies now are starting to pay more attention to that. And my hope would be that those data points will shift a lot in the next year or two. We
Yeah.
just actually had a working session in February. So we do a leadership award each year. We've done it. This will be our third year. And the leaders that have won that award, we have created a community of sorts. And so we have every other month, we have like a leadership call. And we talk about different things, but in February, one of the leaders who's with TouchPack asked if we could dedicate the session to talking about field force well-being. And so he shared some of what they've been looking at, what they've been working on, and they did a survey. And I say survey, it wasn't just a survey, it was followed up with a lot of conversation, but they started researching this, I think it was the year before last. And one of the things that was most surprising to them is that they found their field technicians actually felt closer with their customer culture than they
Mm.
did Tetra Pak's culture because they're with the customers more often. They feel more a part of that than they did the company that they're employed by. And so they've been working on, how can we make them feel more connected? How can we kind of, take better care of them, et cetera. And so that's just evidence that it's definitely being thought about more, and
Yeah.
companies are taking action and realizing the importance. So I think that that's a positive. Yeah, because
Yeah.
they need to change those statistics.
Yeah, totally. And I think that if your original question or your question 2 questions ago about like what could a leader do, having a leader come together with some key employees who maybe are like strong culture carriers or people they want to retain, who they really
Hmm.
trust, HR, marketing, comms, and saying, this is a massive disconnect. How do we build a frontline first culture here that we are known as a frontline first employer?
Hmm.
That would be so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Looking at employee engagement data. Where are the areas where people are falling short? Where are the low scoring categories? What are a few things we could do? What
Hmm.
are the things that are super unique or maybe felt in other parts of our company but not felt to that? And how do we extend it? A lot of times just hitting extended play on,
Yeah.
the programs you're doing in other parts of the company to different types of your workforce. I think
Yeah.
that's such a huge opportunity.
But
The
when
other
you
thing,
think about,
oh,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but when
it's
you
all
think
right.
about those stories that you've heard, when you're going into companies and you're asking, like, what feels special about the culture, et cetera, right? Like, you know, those you have to think about, like, flexibility historically is a perk or a benefit that applies to a lot of in-office, or can apply to a lot of in-office folks, that hasn't necessarily applied to the field. Even like gatherings, getting people together, having a company lunch or a outing, or whatever. Even things like volunteering. I have to assume that historically it's like, no, they're busy doing this customer facing thing. It's too important. We can't let them take time away to do these other
Mhm.
things that we can, allow these other folks to do. You can start to see how a lot of that they would feel other than or separate from.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
becomes an environment of not feeling fair. It doesn't feel
Hmm.
like a fair and inclusive
Yeah.
place where you're included in, oh, that culture is including me.
Yeah.
And there's so many simple ways to extend that, right? If you do one simple one, I've had clients where they did a customer service or sorry, a community service day. But it was like, oh, but these frontline people, we can't do it because of the day. Well, why do a day? Why not do a week? Why not do a whole month? You
Hmm.
can keep that, right, extending the lifespan of something like that so that everybody has an opportunity to focus.
Yeah.
If you have executives doing a roadshow, oh, well, we skipped that market because those people are always out. Well, what's a time frame that would work? Can you
Hmm.
go meet them on the field? Go join them out there with customers. Like
Yeah.
there's such small ways to extend that. It's such a fixable problem that again goes back to just creativity and different doing things differently,
Hmm.
you
I'm trying
know?
to remember who it was the other day, because this is another one that's come up a lot over the years. Is, you have top salespeople are often recognized with a President's Club trip, or a, whatever top performing, vacation. And very, very rarely do you see top service people acknowledged in that same way. And I'm trying to think who it was, but just the other day I got on a call and they were like, "Oh yeah, I was out at President's Club." And I'm like, "That is awesome." Like, that companies are like, "You know what? We need to recognize top performers in that category as well, because, if they're helping with customer retention and customer loyalty and all of these things, it's just as important." So,
Yeah, I have clients where they have a president's club and it's not just salespeople, it's people who are cultural champions who
hmm.
get nominated because they're great cultural carriers. They nominate people from finance and HR and
Yeah.
different parts of the business to attend. That's a great, again, it's just extending existing programs and policies and recognition to all of your workforce. There's
Yeah.
a lot of inequities in our workforce, and it's just purely by design, not because someone was trying to be exclusive. It was like, you've always done this way. No one just
Mhm.
stopped to think about, well, how do we just reframe that? So it's
Yeah.
it's extended to all of our workforce.
Yeah.
So it's totally easy to do.
And it feels like a lot of work to reframe it sometimes, but it's necessary. And, that's the other message I always give is like you can bemoan the reality that what work doesn't work anymore, or you can just get to it and
Well,
create a new reality
exactly.
because, you're just wasting
Yes.
time, right? So,
Yes. I mean, to go
yeah.
back to your original question, another data point that I think was really surprising was to see that in frontline industries that we would need to hire 250,000 people a month just to keep up with the rate of retiree.
Hmm.
So I think there's no choice but to change, right?
Absolutely.
Because without workforce, you don't have productivity, and that very much connects to without a productive workforce and engaged workforce, people who want to be there, who you're bringing in, there's an $11 trillion GDP gap.
Hmm.
So there is no productivity, there's no profit without engagement and people. So
Yeah.
I think we're at a state where like we've
Hmm.
bounced the check and that this industry specifically has to change, right?
Yeah.
You are facing a talent scarcity in a real way. And gosh, what an opportunity, like you said, to market to younger people as a
Mhm.
pathway. I get so psyched for that.
I
Like
know.
to me, I know we've talked about this. I think that's so exciting because not just individual companies have the opportunity to brand. I think this industry has such an incredible opportunity to rebrand as an amazing future path for people. And I
Hmm.
think other countries do this incredibly well. The US is very behind. And I'm
Hmm.
excited about this revolution and I want to be part of it.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
anyone's listening, I would love to work with your service organization. Like I get so psyched about this opportunity. So
Yeah. Because
raising my hand.
that's all it takes is looking at it as an opportunity instead of the problem, right? And then
Yes.
you can get to work on, okay, what do we need to do? Who are we speaking to? How can we do it? And, there's a lot of potential, and it is really exciting. Okay. There's two more questions I have to ask you before we end. One is, on your LinkedIn profile, you say, I'm on a personal mission to ban the term culture
Culture
fit.
fit.
Okay, so I want to hear about this.
Yes, I am on a personal mission to ban the term culture fit. To me, culture fit is just a way to be subjective. There
Hmm.
used to be, you ever heard of the term the beer test?
No.
It was this thing like, well, would you want to interview someone? Well, would you want to go get a beer with
Okay.
them? And I think that the best workforce is like there are probably people where I don't need to go. I mean, actually, I like getting a beer with anybody because I like to talk to people, but that's how I'm built. But that shouldn't like determine who's right for a job or who has
Yeah.
great skills. So I kind of equate culture fit to a beer test. And I think that the term fit is just exclusionary, right? Like, oh, well, they're not a good fit. Well, why are they not a good fit? And when you start to ask why, you get into questions, and it could be that they look different than me or they have a different background. And so I like to use the term culture add instead of
Hmm.
fit. Are they a culture add? Do they bring something unique and different to the table that we don't have that we desperately need as a company? So
Yeah.
I'm on a personal mission, and I have been since working at Pandora Music with one of my dear colleagues, Lisa Lee. We very much are on a personal mission to get rid of that and replace it with culture add.
Okay. I have so many things to say, but actually, I'm not going to say any of them because I will kindly invite you back for a part two at some point on this topic specifically, because I do
Okay.
really feel it is that important.
It is.
And I love where you're going with that. The other question I have to ask you before we end for today is, this blew my mind when we were chatting in San Diego after your session. You shared with me that you do not have a website. So,
Yes.
I just I think that is so interesting. And I love it, I think it feels very rebel coded, which I am a huge fan of personally. Um, so just tell me why and how you operate. I'm asking also because you need to let people know where to find you if they want to
Yes.
win the game at service organization employer branding.
Yes, frontline first. I'm either really dumb or really smart. I can't tell yet. But so the reason why, so it's very ironic that someone who does employer branding doesn't have their own website. And I actually, when I started consulting, I actually created an amazing brand identity and I had a website and I had a trademark name. And then I just got really busy. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just put that on hold. I'm busy. And I started to find that my network was really, I was getting referrals and I was getting just passed to amazing people. And in my 5 years of working, the majority of my client relationships have been wonderful and they're like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Part of why I want to be in this work and I'm consulting versus being in-house is that I want to work with people who want to fix the problems. I don't care if there's broken workplaces, that's everywhere. But if you have the desire to fix something, I want to work with those people. And I found that my network was delivering that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Every time it would get slow, I go, okay, I'm going to pick back up this website. I'll do it. And then I get busy. And what I've just kind of found is that sort of being a whisper network and being a
Mm-hmm.
referral only, like you have to sort of know me or I have to be referred by some way, has kept me in really good company.
Yeah.
So that is why I don't have a website. Maybe one day I will finish it. We'll see.
You kind of have it
Um,
as like a security blanket, like a safety net, like if you ever get slow enough where you're like, you know what, I actually have time that I might put this all together. You have it, but
yes,
you haven't needed
exactly.
it.
I haven't needed it. And you know what? LinkedIn is the largest global, networking site in the world. And I know this because I'm a user and I use it for clients and I used to work there. And so LinkedIn is the place to get a hold of me if you want to see, more about me, my work, things I've done, my clients, my experience, who I am as a person. I'm very big on
Mhm.
like knowing who I am as a person. I'm on there and you can see me. So that's the best place to find me. And that kind of serves as my acting website. And for now, it's really kept me into great company.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's why I
You
don't have one.
know, what you just said reminded me of another great potential employer branding hook, which is like offer somewhere people can be themselves. Like,
Yes,
like it's okay to be you. It's okay to have a personality. It's okay to show who you are. You don't have to be like a robot or a number. You're not a number on a spreadsheet. That would be such a great message to be able
it's
to
true.
authentically give.
You got to be your authentic self. I think that's so true. And yeah, you can see who I authentically am on LinkedIn.
Well, we will definitely link your LinkedIn in the show
Okay,
notes.
great.
And I really appreciate you coming and spending some time and sharing your insights. I appreciate your knowledge and also your energy on the topic. And I share your positive outlook that it's like the potential is all right here. These folks just need to go and make it happen. So,
Absolutely.
thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. You can learn more by visiting the home of Unscripted at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.